Shalom and welcome to another Pod for Israel. We're continuing our series on the case for Messiah, and today we're actually going to be looking at the Son of Man, or one like a Son of Man, in Daniel 7, 13, and 14. And so, Golan, the question we're actually going to be dealing with, did the New Testament get the Son of Man interpretation wrong? Some people have actually questioned the New Testament's interpretation of Daniel 7, 13, and 14.
So let's start by reading the text. We'll see, what are we talking about? What's the text?
Okay, so I'm reading from the New American Standard.
Okay.
I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. And again, that's Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14.
So this Son of Man, who does this Son of Man refer to? That's the question.
Boy, it really does depend who you ask, doesn't it?
So let's ask the New Testament. What does the New Testament say?
So the New Testament, without reservation, identifies Jesus as the one like a Son of Man in Daniel 7, 13, and 14. And so just a couple of passages, Matthew 26, 64 and 65, Jesus said to him, that is to the high priest, "You have said it yourself. Nevertheless, I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his robes and said, "He has blasphemed." Mm-hmm. And again, Revelation chapter 1, verse 7, "Behold, he is coming with the clouds." The reference to the clouds, it's clear enough that this is a messianic interpretation of Daniel 7, 13, and 14, where Jesus is recognized as the one like a Son of Man who will one day come again.
So according to the New Testament, to the authors of the New Testament, Yeshua accomplished this prophecy from Daniel.
In other words, this passage is about Jesus. There is an aspect in the New Testament where they understand there's a future fulfillment, right?
Yep.
But they identify Jesus without reservation as the one like a Son of Man. Okay,
so what are the objections that we're getting? What are the best objections we're getting?
Yeah, so according to the opposing interpretations of this passage, there are actually a couple. So number one, there are those who actually argue that Jesus cannot be one like the Son of Man here because, according to the text, one like a Son of Man in Daniel 7 is Israel.
The nation Israel.
It's the whole nation Israel. It is not the Messiah.
Okay, that's first.
That's first. But now there's another objection that would actually argue that, well, of course, Daniel 7, 13, and 14 is about the Messiah, but it can't be Jesus because Daniel 7, 13, and 14 is only referring to a completely human Messiah. There's nothing divine about this Messiah.
Yep. And the third one?
And the third objection would be that, of course, this cannot be Jesus because when the Son of Man comes, the kingdoms of the world will be destroyed, and the Son of Man will set up an eternal kingdom. Because Jesus didn't set up an eternal kingdom, this can't refer to Jesus.
Okay, so these are the three claims. So let's go one by one and start with the first claim, which says, again,
that Jesus cannot be the Son of Man here in Daniel 7 because the Son of Man is Israel. Now, let me make it clear. It's really important as we work through these texts. Number one, we want to keep a respectful dialogue. You know, sometimes in the comments, we've seen some things that are kind of angry against those who disagree with us or angry against the Jewish people, but we're speaking as Jewish people who love Jewish people. And so we're just dealing with ideas and it's really important. Okay.
Exactly.
So what we're going to do as we deal with these claims, we want to look at the text. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is we want to present the arguments fairly.
Exactly.
Right? I had a friend of mine that once said, you know, in a debate, it's wrong to straw man, that you kind of characterize somebody else's views and then slam it down. You don't go after the straw man, you go after their Iron Man.
So we want to be correct with answering the actual objection.
Correct. It's really important. So here is, and I think that there's actually good textual evidence that the Son of Man is Israel. Okay, let's be clear.
So at least they're using the text.
And I appreciate this argument. This is an interesting argument.
So what's the best defense for the Son of Man being Israel?
Yes. So I want you to notice in Daniel 7:13 and 14, you've got the one like a son of man who comes to the Ancient of Days, and to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, and all nations and people serve him, and his dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, etc. Okay. Daniel is apocalyptic literature, and as is often the case, there are interpretations of the text within the text. And so Daniel actually gets a heavenly messenger to interpret the text. And so notice the interpretation, verses 15 through 18. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things. Here it goes.
And this is important.
This is very important. The great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will arise from the earth. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever for all ages to come. Notice in the interpretation, it's as if the Son of Man is completely ignored. In other words, or you could say it differently, that after the beasts are destroyed, the kingdom is given directly to
the saints,
of the Most High, or the highest one. And therefore, the saints of the Most Highest one are obviously the one like the Son of Man. And so this proves that because there's no reference to the Messiah here, but to the people of Israel, that the one like the Son of Man is not Israel. It's the people of it's not the Messiah, it's Israel.
Yes, so the objection refers to the saints of the highest as Israel.
Correct. Yep. Exactly. So the giving of the kingdom to the saints of the highest one is the interpretation of the giving of the kingdom to the one like the Son of Man.
Yep.
And let me just we'll look at it a little bit more. Again, I want you to notice this one like the Son of Man in verses 13 and 14, who receives dominion and glory and a kingdom. Okay. Notice the interpretation. Okay, verses 26 through 27, but the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away. That is the little horn, annihilated and destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one.
Again, the people of the saints.
Exactly. So here the argument is that the saints are the one like the Son of Man. It's not the Messiah, it's Israel. And let's be fair. This is I appreciate this objection because it's a close reading of the text.
Yep. It uses the text.
But I would argue that it's not a close enough reading of the text.
So what's our response? What would be the proper response?
So there are 3, actually 4, but let's look at the first one. Yep. Response number 1, actually, if we look a little bit more closely at the angelic interpretation, the one like a Son of Man here must be a king.
It has to be a king.
It has to be a king. Look at verse 17 again, okay? Yeah. Let's look at verse 17. We'll look at the larger passage. But notice verses 15 through 18. I'm going to read it again, okay? As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me. I'm going to skip it. I approached one like of those who were standing by, and he began asking him the exact meaning of it all. So he told me, and he made known to me the interpretation of these things. These great beasts, which are 4 in number, are
4 kings.
It doesn't say 4 kingdoms.
Right.
It actually says, the interpretation says 4 kings. So the assumption is that if we're dealing with 4 kings, the beast represents the kings of the nations, then one like the Son of Man has to be the king of Israel.
Exactly.
Okay, that's the interpretation. Now, response 2. Okay, response 2. According to the angelic interpretation, the saints receive the kingdom not from the Ancient of Days, but from the one like the Son of Man. Okay. Now, you're going to have to, we have to work through this slowly because we're dealing with an Aramaic text.
But and it's an important distinction.
An important distinction. Exactly. That's what I meant to say. Let's look at verse 18, okay? I want you to notice verse 18. And by the way, this argument I found, and it was a really great argument. James Hamilton makes this case in a recent publication. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom. Okay, so the Israel interpretation assumes that the highest one here, who gives the kingdom to the saints, is the Ancient of Days.
Yes.
Okay? Mm-hmm. And so the Israel interpretation, I would argue, is based on a faulty assumption.
Yep. And we want to show exactly why, if you look clearly and closer
Correct.
on the text.
So let's look a little bit closer at the text. Daniel 2-7, very important to remind our listeners that Daniel 2-7 is actually not written in Hebrew. It's written in Aramaic, okay? And we'll talk more about this as we continue, but what's really important to notice is that there are actually two similar but not identical words for God's exalted status or divine exalted status.
From the same root, but it's
Correct.
not the same word.
So there's one word, Eliah, the Most High. The Most High. The Aleph here representing the Most High.
Yep.
And then there's another word that the New American Standard translate as the highest one, Elyonin. Now, it's a plural of majesty, just like Elohim, right? But it means the highest one. They're two different words. Now, the word Most High, the Most High, Eliah, is used 10 times in the book of Daniel, in the Aramaic section, 9 times in Daniel 3-6, and only once, in Daniel 7. The other word, Elyonin, the highest one, is only used 4 times in the book of Daniel. And you know what?
Only
Where?
chapter 7.
Only in chapter 7, and only after the vision of the one like the Son of Man.
Trying to prove something.
Okay, so if we're going to, if exegesis is a careful interpretation of the text, we have to ask, why is Elyonin, the Most High, a brand new word that's introduced and only in Daniel 7?
Yep.
And so here's what we would argue, and I think it's a very sound argument, that since the highest one is only used in Daniel 7, and only after the vision in Daniel 7, 13, and 14, the highest one must refer to the Messianic King who receives everlasting dominion from the Ancient of Days. In other words, why is this new word introduced? Because the moment that one like the Son of Man comes in the clouds and he receives all dominion and power and glory, suddenly we have two exalted figures.
And you have to differentiate between them with two different words.
Exactly. And so here's the interpretation. Daniel 7:18 actually affirms the Messianic interpretation by telling us that the saints will receive the kingdom from the highest one. Who is the highest one? The one like the Son of Man. And this happens after the beasts are defeated.
Exactly. And response number 3.
Okay. So this is also really important, Golan. To say that one like the Son of Man, one like a Son of Man is Israel, it actually completely contradicts the theology of the book of Daniel.
Because it assumes that men, Israel, can get worship.
Yes.
And that's...
And yes, and we're gonna spend more time on this as we continue this podcast, but I want you to notice that according to the vision of the one like the Son of Man, when he comes, it says that all peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him.
And that's an important word in the original text.
In the original Aramaic, okay?
Yeah, and we'll talk about it.
We'll talk about it. So the question becomes in the structure of the book of Daniel, who do we serve? Who do we serve? The word here?
Serve for worship, you mean, yeah?
Okay. So notice the word that's used here. When the nations are serving the Son of Man, or the one like a Son of Man, the Aramaic word is palach. Plach.
Plach.
Okay.
But it's pei lamed chet, the root word. Yeah.
Okay. In Hebrew today, we have the word pulchan, right?
Exactly. Worship.
Pulchan means worship, right? But here's what's interesting. The word plach in Targum Ankulas and other Targumim means
Just work.
to work. But in the book of Daniel, and actually in the Hebrew Bible, whenever there's an Aramaic text, that word is exclusively used for worship.
For worship, some kind of the deity, either false or true.
Correct.
Okay.
In the book of Daniel, the word is only used. So, for instance, in Daniel 3:14, Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, the three Hebrews, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not you do not serve
worship
my gods or worship the golden image I've set up?"
Yep.
Notice verse 28 in chapter 3. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command and yielding up their body so as not to
worship.
serve or worship any god except their own." In the book of Daniel, this word, plach, is reserved for the worship of divine beings. And in the context of proper worship, when I say divine beings, false ones too.
It could be false idols. Yeah.
It can be idols, but it's forbidden. And so the fact that we would say that all the nations
Would worship
right, that
Israel,
it
that
just
doesn't sound
doesn't
right.
make sense at all.
So the argument goes like this. So let's see the argument.
So from lesser to greater.
Exactly.
So if the Hebrews refuse to serve a false god in Daniel 3.
Worship, yeah. And remember, we're talking about worship.
Worship,
Yep.
right? If the Hebrews refuse to serve, plach, a false god in Daniel 3, and Daniel refuses to pray to the king to plach, right, to serve a false god in Daniel chapter 6, why is it okay for all the tribes, tongues, and nations to worship Israel?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Theologically,
in the
it doesn't make sense. Yep.
And so we would argue that one like a son of man cannot be Israel. Who do you think it is then, according to the text?
It has to be the Messiah.
It has to be the Messiah. It cannot be Israel. And Golan, you are our expert in rabbinic literature here.
So
is there any support?
So I would ask you to read the quote, and we have a support from the Talmud. The sages themselves saw this passage as a messianic prophecy.
In other words, to claim that the New Testament twisted or got this passage wrong is kind of misleading, because then what about all the other Jewish interpreters that also say the same thing as the New Testament?
Yep. In other words, the Jewish authors of the New Testament were not the only one.
Exactly. So we're going to read from Sanhedrin 98a, okay? Rabbi Alexandri says, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi raises a contradiction between two depictions of the coming of the Messiah. It is written, "There came with the clouds of heaven one like a son of man, and there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. And it is written, Behold, your king will come to you. He is just and victorious, lowly and riding upon a donkey and upon a colt, the foal of a donkey." Rabbi Alexandri says Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi raises a contradiction between two depictions of the coming of the Messiah, right?
And he uses that
Daniel 7:13 through 14,
Exactly.
and Zechariah 9:9. And the question is, does the Messiah come in the clouds of the air, or does he come on a donkey?
Yeah.
Or does he come on a flying donkey, right?
So the rabbis say, if Israel are righteous, he would come in heaven, in the clouds of heaven. If Israel are sinful, yeah.
But the point is,
they're looking at it as a messianic prophecy.
okay, there's no arguments here.
So
Okay.
let's go to claim number 2. What was the second claim against the New Testament interpretation?
Okay, so there are those that actually would argue, okay, of course Daniel 7:13 and 14, one like a son of man, absolutely it's the Messiah.
Like the Talmud says.
Like the Talmud says, but here it cannot be Jesus, absolutely can't be Jesus, because Son of Man only means a human being.
Yes, Son of Man, right?
This has nothing to do with divinity. It has nothing to do with divine status. And therefore, this cannot refer to Jesus, at least according to the New Testament's depiction of Jesus.
Yep. So the claim uses, of course, verses, for example, to prove their point.
Okay. So if you look at, for instance, Ezekiel chapter 2, verse 1, okay, God calls Ezekiel son of man. And in fact, The word son of man or the phrase son of man is used over 90 times in Ezekiel.
And of course, Ezekiel is only a man.
We're not tempted to fall down and worship Ezekiel. So son of man is absolutely, according to as the argument goes, it just means a human being.
And another argument for the humanity of this son of man.
Okay, so here the argument goes that, listen, the fact that the nation's tribes are serving the Messiah in Daniel 7, 13, and 14, verse 14, right? That doesn't mean that he's divine. Yeah. He's just a human king. And here's the proof. Well, Jeremiah 27, 6 through 7. Now I've given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and I have given him also the wild animals of the field to serve him. All the nations shall serve him, and his sons and his son and his grandson, until the time of his own land comes. Then many nations and great kings will make him their servant. It doesn't mean that Nebuchadnezzar, because they're serving Nebuchadnezzar, doesn't make Nebuchadnezzar God.
Exactly.
And so here's the refutation, right? That this cannot be. Son of man, just a human being. Serving does not mean that he's God whatsoever.
Yeah, he doesn't have to be divine. So what is our response to this claim?
Well, what do we say all the time? Context, context, context.
Exactly.
Okay, so here we need to make clear again that we're discussing ideas. We're not attacking people. We're discussing ideas, and obviously we're arguing and wrestling over the meaning of text. And so we'll always go back to context as the most important and determining factor to the meaning,
even to the layout of the book of Daniel itself, right?
And you know what? Daniel is a beautiful book. I mean, obviously, every book of the Bible is beautiful. But I want you to notice something. If you look at the structure of the Aramaic of Daniel, so chapter 2 through 7, you have this Aramaic structure where the ends are paralleled as we move into the center. In other words, Daniel 2 and Daniel 7, you have Nebuchadnezzar's dream about the four-part statue, Daniel's vision of the four beasts. You have the coming of the stone not cut with hands, who destroys the kingdoms, the coming of the one like the Son of Man, who destroys the four beasts.
Beautiful.
Okay? You have the establishment of God's eternal kingdom in chapter 2. After the beasts are destroyed, you have the establishment of God's eternal kingdom after the beasts are destroyed. So 2 and 7 are parallel.
2 and 7 are parallel.
Yes. 3 and 6 are parallel. In chapter 3, you have the Jewish men that refuse to worship the false gods, right? In chapter 6, you have Daniel who refuses to pray to the king, a false deity. In chapter 3, the three men are thrown into a fiery furnace because their refusal to worship non-gods.
And in 6,
Daniel is thrown into the lion's den because of his refusal to worship a non-god. In both chapters, God sends his angel to rescue them, and then King Nebuchadnezzar, King Darius, gives glory to the God of Israel.
Amen.
Now, chapter 4 and chapter 5, as we move in, are also parallel. Yeah. In both chapters, you have a proud king of Babylon. In both chapters, Daniel is called to interpret dreams or writing on a wall. In both passages, God humbles the king of Babylon, in one case temporarily, in another case permanently.
Yep.
So why is this important? Daniel 3 and Daniel 6 are crucial for us determining the meaning of the word plach, serve.
And that's the word we mentioned earlier and said we're going to go back to it because it's a crucial word.
We have to spend some time here because here we see the question is, whom shall we serve in the book of Daniel? Who do we serve? Who are we willing to serve, and who are we willing to die so as not to serve? And
again, the word serve in the meaning of worship. Worship is
plach.
Either a false deity or a true deity.
We're not denying the fact that the word plach, an Aramaic word, is used by later Jewish Aramaic texts just to mean work. But that's not the question. What does it mean in Daniel?
In Daniel.
Exactly. And so I want you to notice there's false worship and true worship.
Yep.
So I'm going to go through these passages because we need to see it. In Daniel 3:12, these men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not worship, plach, your gods, or worship, right? They don't serve your gods or worship the golden image you've set up. Daniel 3 verse 17, If it be so, our God whom we
Worship.
serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of the blazing fire.
Exactly.
Daniel 3 verse 14, false worship. Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image I've set up? On the other side, Daniel 6 verse 16, your God, he says, Darius says to Daniel, your God whom you constantly serve will deliver you. Daniel 3 verse 18, but even, here's the Hebrew saying, even if God does not deliver us, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to plach. We're not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up.
And now the important part, yes.
Well, okay,
the most important part.
Chapter 6, verse 20, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you. Now watch.
Exactly.
3:28, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command, and yielded up their body so as not to what? Plach, to serve or worship any god except their own God.
Yep.
Who do you plach? Who do you worship in the book of Daniel? Okay? And here we have 7:14.
7:14.
And to him, the one like a son of man, is given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might worship him. In other words,
He has to be divine.
to say that he's only a human being here is actually to point to a contradiction in the theology of the book of Daniel. But of course, we would argue that there's no contradictions here.
course.
The one like a son of man here is divine.
So let me ask you this. Does this word in Aramaic appears anywhere else in the Aramaic Bible, in the Aramaic portion of the Hebrew Bible?
You know what? It only appears one other time, only one other time, in Ezra chapter 7, verse 34.
And let's see the context. Okay.
Again, we also, here, I'll read it. We also inform you that it is not allowed to impose tax, tribute, or toll on any priests, Levites, singers, doorkeepers, netinim, or servants of the house of God. The word here for servants of the house of God, it's in the context of religious worship. And so whenever plach is used in the Hebrew Bible,
in the Aramaic part, of course,
in
yes.
the Aramaic sections of the Hebrew Bible, it's a word that is exclusively used for the worship or for false worship of divine beings.
It's connected to worship of divine beings.
So
exactly.
The one like a son of man has to be divine. He has to be.
Okay, so let's
fully
go.
God, not partially God.
Exactly.
Fully God.
So let's go back to Ezekiel, because what about Ezekiel? Wasn't Ezekiel the son of man?
Well, here's what's really amazing. I want you to notice, yes, Ezekiel is called son of man, but I want you to notice there's a passage that sheds a lot of light on one like a son of man in Daniel 7. Let's read it. You ready for this?
Yep. So where are you reading from?
Do you have your seatbelt on? Because you're going to fall off your chair. I'm reading from Ezekiel 1, 26 through 28. Now above the expanse that was over their heads, there was something resembling a throne, like lapis lazuli in appearance. And on that which resembled a throne, high up, was a figure with the appearance of a man.
Wow.
So who is this one seated on a throne with the appearance of a man? Then I noticed from the appearance of his loins and upward something like glowing metal that looked like fire all around within it. And from the appearance of his loins and downward I saw something like fire, and there was radiance around him as the appearance of the rainbow in the clouds. Notice the reference to clouds on a rainy day. So was the appearance of the surrounding radiance. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of God. Wow. And when I saw it, I fell on my face and I heard a voice speaking.
So Ezekiel himself, seeing in the vision, appearance of a man, and he identifies it with the glory of the Lord, the glory of God.
So to say that one like a son of man is completely human, number one, it disregards the meaning of serve or worship in Daniel. But number two, it throws out or it disregards the fact that Ezekiel sees a similar vision of someone who has an appearance like a man, but it's the full glory of God. It's God himself.
And he falls on his face.
He falls on his face, just like the nations who worship.
Okay, so let's go to the final claim, the final objection.
Well, before we go to the final objection, because remember, you are our rabbinic.
So even from the Talmud, we have a verse or a quote that reinforces the divine. At least we have a dispute between two rabbis.
Okay.
And I want you to read the dispute between Rabbi Akiva and his fellow rabbi.
So this is from Hagigah.
Yep.
14a. The Gemara poses another question. One verse states, his throne was fiery flames, Daniel 7:9. And another phrase in the same verse states, till thrones were placed and one who was ancient of days sat, implying the existence of two thrones.
So they're referring to that text in Daniel 7.
Absolutely. The Gemara answers, this is not difficult. One throne is for him and one is for David, as it is taught in the Baraita with regard to this issue. One throne for him, God, and one for David, i.e. the Messiah. This is the statement of Rabbi Akiva.
So Rabbi Akiva saw a divine Messiah sits next to God. And what did Rabbi Akiva suffer? What was the objection to him?
Okay, so Rabbi Yossi Haglili said to him, Akiva, how long shall you make the divine presence profane? That's blasphemy, right? By presenting it as though one could sit next to him. Rather, the two thrones are designated for two different purposes, and he goes on to explain.
So Rabbi Yossi understood that Akiva is claiming a divine Messiah.
Or at least a Messiah that's sitting in the divine throne room.
Yep.
Right? We're not just talking about just an ordinary human being.
So we have a quote from the Talmud that also says that at least there was a dispute among Jewish men about the identity of this Messiah.
Correct.
Yep. So what's the final claim?
Okay, so the final claim against the New Testament's interpretation of Daniel 7, 13, and 14, Jesus absolutely can't be the Son of Man because he didn't establish the eternal kingdom. If he's the Son of Man, why were not the beastly kingdoms and the beasts, these kings of the earth, destroyed?
Yep.
Okay, so here's the objection. When the Son of Man comes, all the nations serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. And the argument goes that Jesus is not ruling and reigning on the earth.
And by the way, didn't the disciples of Yeshua himself anticipated that he would bring the kingdom to Israel?
Do you remember, what is it in Acts chapter 1, right? They said, is it at this time you will establish your kingdom in Israel?
And what did he tell them?
He says it's not for you to know the times and the seasons, okay? But the argument is since Jesus didn't establish, since the kingdom wasn't established in Jesus' day, Jesus can't be the one like a son of man.
So what's our response for that?
Well, the response is actually quite a simple response. It's just we need to have a fair reading of the New Testament, right?
Yep.
And a fair reading of the New Testament never claims that Jesus actually, when he came, set up the kingdom. In other words, Daniel 7, 13 through 14 will be fulfilled when Yeshua returns.
Amen.
Again, that's what the text says. Look at Matthew 26, 64 through 65. Jesus said to him, you have said it yourself. Nevertheless, I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. He says, you will see it. Look at Revelation 1:7 again. Behold, he, that is the one like a son of man, is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him. Zechariah will have a podcast about that as well. And all the tribes of the earth will mourn over him. So it is to be. Amen. And so we are not claiming...
We're looking for the fulfillment when Yeshua returns.
In this, we join with our Jewish brothers in the flesh, right? We are longing for that day when the Messiah returns or comes and establishes an eternal kingdom. The difference is that we know from the scriptures that Jesus is that returning or coming
Yeah, and by
Messiah.
the way, remember that dispute in the Talmud that they say that there's alleged contradiction coming with on a donkey or with the clouds, and we're saying he came riding on a donkey and he will come with a cloud.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Excellent point. In other words, there is no dispute. He's not going to come on a flying donkey. He's going to come twice. And the New Testament actually argues the first time Messiah came on a donkey.
So let's sum up the arguments, but one by one.
Okay, so here are the arguments. First, although some argue that the one like a son of man is Israel, the angelic interpretation and the worship that he receives makes it clear that we're talking about the Messiah. It has to be the Messiah.
A person, yeah.
Right, a person, not a nation. Secondly, for those who argue that we're just dealing with a human Messiah, not a divine Messiah, we're arguing this cannot be. Why? Because the worship he receives in the context of Daniel would be entirely inappropriate if the Messiah is not fully divine.
Exactly.
Okay? Third and finally, for those that argue that Jesus cannot be the Son of Man because he didn't establish God's eternal kingdom, we would argue and agree that Jesus will one day come again. In other words, the New Testament affirms that one day Jesus will set up an eternal kingdom here on earth.
Amen, because he did what he had to do the first time he came.
Why did he come the first time?
To die for our sins.
Amen.
And he resurrected. God resurrected him from the dead. So we have the hope. If he did what he had to do the first time, when he comes back, he'll do the rest.
Amen. And so
Amen.
In this series, again, our goal is not to create antagonism with people and towards people that disagree with us. Our desire is to encourage people to go back to the texts and to study carefully for themselves. And we're hoping that if you'll look carefully at these texts, you will see that it is quite reasonable to believe that the New Testament correctly identified Jesus as the Jewish Messiah.
Amen.
If this touched your heart, will you help pay it forward to reach others who need to hear this message? Partner with our team to bring the gospel to Israel and the nations.